Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about our upcoming concert on Wednesday, July 16th. We're going to be welcoming back the Bellingham Festival of Music's laureate conductor, Michael Palmer, to lead a program entitled The Viennese Connection, featuring works by Carl Maria von Weber, Mozart, and Ludwig van Beethoven. The first work on our program is Carl Maria von Weber's Overture to the opera Oberon. Carl Maria von Weber was a contemporary of Beethoven and Schubert. He was music director at the opera houses in Dresden and Prague, and he is very much responsible for expanding the size of the orchestra, and he was also one of the first conductors to use a baton in the modern sense. His opera Oberon, which is his only opera in English and his last opera, is based on a 13th century epic poem. It tells the story of Oberon, king of the elves, his wife Titania, the trickster Puck, and mischievous magical fairies. There are obvious parallels here with Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, although this is not the same exact story, though the source material is the same. Now, in this overture, I encourage you to listen out for the magical horn call, which begins the overture, the laughter of the mischievous fairies in the woodwinds, and then the virtuosic passage work throughout the overture for the violins. The second work on our program is Mozart's Concerto for Flute and Harp in C major, featuring Christina Smith on flute and Sophie Baird-Daniel on harp. Mozart wrote this work in 1778 while he was in Paris for 7 months. Mozart was working for a wealthy aristocrat who played the flute quite well, actually, and Mozart was tutoring this man's daughter who played the harp. Now, the aristocrat requested that Mozart write a piece that they could play together, so Mozart agreed, and he wrote this concerto for flute and harp. Unfortunately, Mozart was never paid for this work, and he was also only paid half of what he was supposed to be paid for the tutoring. Perhaps because of this, Mozart never wrote another work that involved the harp in any way. The harp was very much in its nascent stage of development, not at all the modern instrument that we know today, but something similar. Other than the novel instrumentation, the concerto is quite standard. It's in 3 movements, the first movement being an allegro in sonata form, the second movement, slow lyrical in F major, and the last movement is a rondo. The final work on our program is Ludwig van Beethoven's Symphony No. 4 in B-flat major. In 1806, Beethoven was invited to spend the summer at the estate of his patron, the Prince Lichnowsky, in Silesia, what's modern-day Poland. In September of that summer, the prince and Beethoven attended a concert hosted at the house of their neighbor, the Count von Oppensdorf. Now, Beethoven was honored at this event by a performance of his own Symphony No. 2, and the Count von Oppensdorf immediately offered Beethoven a large sum to compose a brand new symphony for him. Now, of course, Beethoven immediately accepted. The Symphony No. 4 is often overshadowed by its more famous neighbors, the Symphony No. 3, the Eroica, and the Symphony No. 5 of dun 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 fame. But the Symphony No. 4 is just as brilliant and wonderful in its own right. It very much shows the influence of Beethoven's teacher Joseph Haydn in its more classical sensibilities and its use of humor. Now, the first movement opens with a lengthy, slow introduction in a minor key. In fact, we don't actually hear our tonic chord, B-flat major, until after the exposition has already started. Now we're launched into a fast exposition, very jubilant music with lots of contrasting themes. One unique aspect of this symphony, featured prominently in the first and second movements, is the independent role of the timpani, which often gets its own motives in its own right. This is interesting because Beethoven also wrote during the same year his violin concerto, which famously opens with a 4-note motive for the timpani alone, something that no composer had ever done before. The second movement is primarily based around this dotted rhythm, dum, bum bum, bum bum, bum bum, bum bum, and so on, over which many beautiful, graceful, slow themes are overlaid. And the timpani gets the final say at the end when it gets to do the dun 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 by itself. The third movement is a typical scherzo, although Beethoven does something unique for the first time with this movement. Typically, with a scherzo, you would play the scherzo section, then have a contrasting section, which we call the trio section, and then the scherzo would be repeated exactly. Beethoven decides to extend this form by repeating the trio section another time and then having the scherzo section played another time after that, so that the overall form becomes something like A, B, A, B, A, with the final A being slightly truncated. This is something Beethoven would do in a lot of his later works. He also does this in his 7th Symphony, exactly the same way with the scherzo, and with many of his string quartets. Now, the finale is brilliant. It features almost constant 16th notes. It's very virtuosic for almost all of the instruments. You can most clearly see the influence of Haydn in this movement in particular, with the way it ends almost with a kind of joke, where the main theme is slowed down to halftime, broken up by very awkward pauses, and then suddenly it just ends brilliantly. And back to the original tempo. It's very funny. So, I hope you enjoy the Viennese connection and are welcoming back our laureate conductor, Michael Palmer.